Well, what 1929 can teach us about today. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, if you got a question for me, I want to invite you to go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. When you get to the site, you'll get an opportunity to sign up for the email newsletter list. I want to make sure that you do that and know that that is something that is there for you. So just go to the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Go to the top of the page, and you'll see Ask Prudent Money. And from there, just put your name down. We don't sell that to anybody or give that away or anything like that. She goes in our database, and we'll keep you posted as we put new information on the website. So that's off the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Well, I got to tell you that I do feel very blessed to get the opportunity to interview some really great authors. And the one that I've got coming onto the program on Thursday is no exception. And his name is Andrew Ross Sorkin, and he is a New York Times best-selling author. And his book, 1929, is a number one best-selling book on the New York Times best-selling list as well. And I just think that no matter where you are on your investment journey, if you want, and I'm talking to people who really want to take it to the next level, who want to really start to understand that what's going on in the days today and in the days ahead are really things that have gone on in the past. And one of the things that I think really holds true is that Mark Twain got, I don't know if he exactly said this, but he got the credit for it. He says that history does not repeat itself, it rhymes. And that's not the exact quote, but you get that. That's almost the exact quote. History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And there's a lot of changes that have occurred, obviously, but in different time periods for sure, between what happened in 1929 and what happened and what's happening today. And I don't want to suggest that I'm bringing this story to your attention because this is going to happen. I just think that you've got to realize there's a probability of some type of thing that can an event that can rhyme with this and look a lot like it. So 1929 and the years that followed started with the great stock market crash of 1929, and that's when the crash started, and it ended up going down in not all at once, obviously, but 1929 to 1932 ended up being an 86% decline. And of course, this is at the same time the Great Depression hit the country and literally brought it to its knees. Homes, farms, livelihoods were lost. People living in tent cities. It's you would look at pictures of it and go, could that possibly be America? Well, it was. Very challenging and life-changing time in our country. 2008 was a little, not obviously tent cities, not or anything like that, but it was a tough time for investors. And I think you remember that. It was the financial crisis. And a lot of what happened in the 2008 financial crisis is a lot like what happened in 1929 and during the Great Depression. Fortunately, it didn't get down to that level, but there's so many similarities. I think that as I read the book, the thing that just jumped off the page is the number of similarities, things that presidents say, things that politicians do, the blame game. I mean, you could just go on and on and on. The Tariff Act, Smoot-Hawley, I think I'm saying that right, Tariff Act was, I think, brought into law in 1930. And it literally drug the country deeper into a Great Depression, into what they call, named it the Great Depression. It ended up being a bad thing. In fact, I can't find anywhere where tariffs are a good thing. But dealing with the same thing that we're dealing with today. And the story of 1929 and the story of 2025 have a lot in common, but there's one dynamic that connects the two different time periods. I mean, you can look at the change of technology, you can look at the change of the financial landscape, you can look at the way their culture was back then, the way it is today, the way they did things, the way we do things. Like I said, technology is, of course, the biggest thing that changes everything. I mean, what's interesting is that their big technology was RCA and the radio. And I mean, all that was just coming into existence. And so, but the one biggest dynamic out of all of them was debt. It was about a country full of debt, speculative debt. And you took that debt because you thought it was going to make you rich. It was going to set you up for life. It was greed-fueled debt to create the illusion of money. Paper money versus actual money. And when I say paper money, all those tremendous gains in the stock market of the 20s, which you could point back and look back at the last 10 years and say the same thing, was on paper. And there on paper, it declined in value as quickly as it went up. The banking system almost completely collapsed. Now that happened in 2008. There was a time where they almost completely lost the financial system. But we have the ability to do certain things like print money and backing up companies. And of course, they did some of that, but in 1929 in the 30s, but not like we can today. And that's where, I've always said the Federal Reserve Board, the Federal Reserve, and politicians realized their power. And the banking system is really an interesting dynamic of how everything played out in 1929 to 1932 and beyond. But the similarities in 2008 between today and yesteryears are concerning. And what it is that makes someone think that you can connect debt and speculative investing, you're going to create all this happiness fueled by money that you can't handle. The question is, though, could it happen again? Now, I know that that's a, first of all, you've got to find what percentage of people, when it comes to you working with your financial advisor, or have a good working knowledge of what happened in 1929 or the 30s to answer that question. But of course, absolutely no, says Pop Culture Finance. Because if they would look at and consider what happened between 1929 and 1932, which was the big multi-year bear market, stock market crash, they considered it in there as, and once again, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying that there's a big difference between accepting that it's a probability versus saying, oh, that'll never happen because we've got this in place or we've got that in place. It doesn't need to happen exactly. It doesn't have to be a repeat of history, but it has to rhyme. And I think we have a lot of things rhyming today. But, it comes down to classic greed and speculative investing, and this book is just full of it. But I talk about this. In fact, we went out and pursued this author to come on the program, and he was very kind to accept our invitation. And so if you get a chance, make a chance, because you can always listen to it on the podcast, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You want to listen to this particular interview and hear what he has to say, because there's a lot that, they talk about the events of the 20s and 30s, but they don't take it a complete step further as what does that mean for today. So really looking forward to hearing what he has to say about that. But could it happen again? And if you block out the probability of something happening, you don't have to prepare for it. You don't have to look at it and say, well, that's one of the possibilities. That's why it's not as dangerous to stay invested and just buy and hold for the long term and everything be okay. The type of an event that investors, the stock market at the top of 1929 did not get back up to the same place until the 1940 something. I will confirm all of my dates by the time I end up doing this interview, but just bear with me. It was a long time. If you remove that, it would be fairly easy to accept that, well, as long as the market doesn't go down more than this much, or doesn't last longer than this amount of a period, then we should be okay. A lot of the buy and hold for the long term makes sense. But if you bring something that that's been so dramatic and horrific as this was, where people lost everything, it's just unbelievable. When you factor that in, the numbers look a lot different. And they look a whole lot different. I think it's very important for us as stewards of what God has given us to make sure that we understand the significant impact of history. And I think what just laid such an impression on me, and I've read books about the 20s and 30s. This one's the most well-written book that I've come across by far. But just to read this and see what I thought during 2008, during the financial crisis, was something that was unheard of. But these were things that were done in the 20s and 30s. When you start to realize how closely these mirror each other, it makes you think. I've always said that managing risk, is very, very important when it comes to being a steward of what God has given us. And that's where, if I can call it, the system has failed investors. We'll talk about growth. We'll get excited about speculative growth. But then, of course, nobody likes the market when it falls and declines, or even if it crashes. But that's not as interesting, because we just don't think that's going to happen. If you look at it, and there's a Oppenheimer mutual fund company. Well, but they do mutual funds. I think they still do mutual funds. Oppenheimer would send out to the advisors who use their funds, this is what you tell your client. This was in 2008. You didn't know that happened. It shouldn't be a shock. And so this is what you tell your client if they're concerned about the the bear market and what's going on. And you tell them that don't worry because there are way more good years than a few bad years. Although that is somewhat true, you also have to know that the bad years are so bad that it takes the number of good years that we have to average it out. So you got to have twice, if it's twice or whatever, the number of years that are making money, because you dig such a hole when you go through these bear markets. But we shouldn't be talking about bear markets. Nobody's talking about bear markets because nobody's concerned about one. But I think that today you've got to be very, very careful. The verses of risk that I always refer to in my webinars or in workshops is found 2 different places separated by 5 books in the Book of Wisdom. Now, do you think that God is trying to tell you something? Tell me something? Tell us all something? Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the identical verse, word for word. It goes something like this. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton just goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. So you have somebody who is the prudent one, the wise one, foresees, and I'm not saying forecast or anything like that. I'm saying get a good idea of what kind of risk is out there and manage that risk from the standpoint of praying about it and making sure that you're where your peace is, that you're okay with this much, or you need to lower your risk level a little bit and take precautions. And when I say take precautions, that comes down to investing in your plan B, which we talk about on the program, having a plan A and a plan B because the market doesn't always go up. But I think you've got to be really in tune and touch this. And this interview on Thursday will really kick that off, I believe, for you to understand what's going on and what steps to take. What's interesting is, and I got this off of ChatGPT, so excuse me if I'm a few verses off. According to this resource, there's 31,102 verses in the Bible. And a little bit over 275 of those verses are duplicate verses. And think about, just let that resonate in your mind for a second. All of the wisdom and the incredible acts of Scripture in the Bible, and only 275 to about 325, I don't know how they get the range, it's either is or it isn't, are duplicate word for word. And one is on what I call the verses of risk. Once again, do you think God wants us to be paying attention? So you start to look at, well, what's really going on? And if we're keeping this about debt, I think we don't have to go too far. We can go to Wallet Hub, which is they do some great studies and surveys and that type of thing, and always send their results to us. And we talk about it from time to time. But it says that Wallet Hub has just analyzed new data that was released by the Federal Reserve and discovered that even though credit card debt hit a new record high of $1.33 trillion in August 2025, the total is actually $106 billion below the record from 2007 when you adjust for inflation. Now, okay, maybe so, 106 billion below according to inflationary figures. But bottom line is $1.33 trillion is a lot of credit card debt. And it wasn't that long ago when it was below $1 trillion. So we've got this $1 trillion worth of $1 trillion+ worth of credit card debt, and let's face it, this is debt that, not like 1929 where people were, and I'll let him tell the story, but were betting for the mark for stock to continue to go up and borrowing money to buy stock. That's where all the majority of the debt came from. But it's a huge problem when you start thinking of it from the standpoint of credit cards. If there's high unemployment, hopefully that we won't see that. But if there's high unemployment, somewhat like it was during the Great Depression, then it's tough to pay back that debt. And here's some of the statistics that highlight this Wallet Hub piece. Said old balances still due. 43% of people say they are still paying off credit card debt from this fall. No room for more debt. Nearly 2 in 5 Americans say they can't handle any more credit card debt. More debt ahead. 33% of people say they will have more credit card debt by the end of 2025. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a big number to look at your future and go, 33% of people, I'm going to have more credit card debt by the end of this year. A major source of stress. 1 in 5 Americans are very stressed about their credit card debt. I would suggest that that's a little bit higher of a number. Uncle Sam in rough shape. Nearly 4 in 5 people say the country's debt is in worse shape than their personal debt. Well, when you're comparing trillions to thousands, I guess you could say that. But no question, we are in tough shape. And it just gets a little bit more interesting as we go along. And then fear of debt tops AI. 37% of people are more concerned about never getting out of debt, credit card debt, than AI stealing their job. Interesting. No AI in wallet. 78% of Americans say they would not be comfortable giving AI access to their credit card account. And so that kind of gives you the landscape of what we're dealing with. And once again, I stick to what I feel. I said the other day about AI. I think the technology is so much further ahead than we as a society are ready for this. Corporations are ready for this. And this reminds me a whole lot of 1999 during the tech bust, because the internet was about the same way. It was kind of getting ahead of itself. And I'm also starting to see about how much debt and leverage that these companies are taking out. Just think about it. If you could see this amazing technology and you want to be a part of it, and you have to borrow money because you think you're going to hit gold, then you're going to borrow money as a company. And there's a lot of companies doing it. So you want to be very, very careful. Unfortunately, I am not even a quarter of the way through of what I really wanted to talk about. And I think I'll get there this week. Like I said, Thursday, really excited about interviewing on the book 1929. And I think it's something that you really need to check into and listen when you get a chance. Hey, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. If you got a question for me, I'd love to help you out. Just go to the prudentmoney.com website, top of the page, and send that question. It'll get you taken care of. For today, we are all out of time. Until we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.